Yeah, welcome to Intro to Accessibility. Just to kind of preface this talk, it will not be very technical. I'm mostly going to gloss over that. And I'm also going to gloss over a lot of numbers. When I say numbers, I mean things like percentages of people that are afflicted with a certain disability, or percentages of missed sales or of litigation risk. All those numbers exist, and I promise you that they always come out in favor of a good user experience for as many people as possible. But I think that's a bad framing for accessibility. I don't think it's very empathetic, and I think it misses a lot of the point. So those numbers exist if you want to go find them. They're available, but I'm not going to cover them here. And my goal is to kind of, at the end of this, that everyone can be a more empathetic developer. So let's get started. So who is all of this really for? I want to talk about the curb cut effect. If you're not familiar with what a curb cut is, it is those ramps in sidewalks that were originally designed to let wheelchair users get back up onto the sidewalk after crossing the road. But today, there was a nice study done, and 90% of unencumbered pedestrians will go out of their way to go for a curb cut. So that just goes to show that something that was done initially for accessibility ends up helping a lot more people than that. So I think when we say that we're making an accessibility improvement, a lot of the time it's just an improvement for practically everyone that happens to maybe help accessibility more than other things, but everyone can benefit. So online, what are some examples where we might see this curb cut effect? We have things like alt text for images. Images can take a really long time to load, but alt text loads basically instantly. So that lets users know of like whether or not they should wait around for an image, or if it was mostly descriptive, and they can kind of move on with their content. Other things like keyboard-friendly sites are often preferred by power users, so they can like breeze through forms and whatnot. And then more broadly, no one's ever complained about like too intuitive or too easy to use of a navigation. So things like that really do benefit all users, even if you built them with accessibility in mind. So if we're going to be talking about disabilities and accessibility, we should kind of define our terms here. So disability is a mismatch between a person and their environment. And I think that really frames accessibility in a way where we can take ownership for our work and not put the onus on the people that need the help. And when I say people that need the help, I think a lot of times we think of someone that was born blind or born deaf, but disabilities can come and go throughout our lives, basically any day or time. So things like you broke your arm, suddenly you can't type as well. Or let's say you're in an open office environment, you don't get to work from home, you're constantly distracted by something, you're not going to be able to focus on whatever you're doing as well. So now your attention span is depleted, and focusing on something might just be harder. So we have a lot of these things that wouldn't maybe be considered medically disabilities, but are disabilities when someone's trying to use our product. So a lot of our improvements can impact a lot more people than just the 100% blind, 100% deaf, etc. So on the web, we have 5 main disabilities that we focus on. And I'm going to go through these kind of bottom up. I think the bottom 2 are maybe the most confusing. When I say cognitive disabilities, I'm talking about things like where maybe you have a multi-step form. Instead of on step 1 saying, hey, remember to do something on step 7, we want to just tell them that on step 7. We don't want to rely on users to memorize something to do later. And that can be for either a cognitive disability in a more like traditional medical sense, or simply because someone's distracted. Vestibular, a less fancy way of saying it is motion sickness. So things like really big animations or videos, those can cause motion sickness in people. And so we don't want people to be uneasy, physically uneasy, while they're interacting with our site or a product or what have you. Then we get into kind of maybe more often thought about concerns. So hearing, obviously a big issue with any video or audio content. Not only deafness or hard of hearing, but also on the previous slide, we had just someone in a really noisy environment. They're not gonna be able to watch your video no matter how like pertinent it is to them. And then we probably get to the most thought about vision and motor. Vision disabilities, obviously things like blindness, but also thinking about people that have different degrees of color blindness or things like stigmatism, where maybe things are just a little bit blurry. And then the last one that I kind of skipped over, I guess, motor disabilities. Not everyone uses a mouse, some by choice because they're super power users and know all the shortcuts. Other less by choice, maybe because they have a tremor or they have a hard time holding it. We don't want to be reliant on a certain mode of input for any of our sites. And unfortunately, a lot of these effects are side effects of old age. So as you get older, for a lot of people, vision starts to get worse. You start having potentially memory problems, or things like arthritis start to become more popular, more common. So if nothing else has felt like it would affect you directly, at the very least, we all do get older, and so we're really building for our future selves. Whenever I'm talking about accessibility, I do have kind of an odd moment of someone who's never relied on accessibility tools myself. It's always something that I've learned from others. So these are short clips. I just want to take a moment to actually see and hear how other people use accessibility tools. So I think this will just play.
All right, Trev, just let me know, man.
Can everyone hear that?
You're a dude, you just don't know how to change your name color? That's cool, Blunny. I remember, man. Coming in hot, no helmet, no vest, no sights. I'm not scared of my stats. Man down. I started gaming when I was younger, probably like 5 years old. I used to play games like NHL, Call of Duty, Halo before I got hurt. When I was 19 years old, I was at a party with a couple of my friends, and it was just a freak accident where I got dropped on my head wrestling around. Injured at C3, C4 vertebrae on my neck, and my spinal cord got severed. The official diagnosis for me is a tetraplegic, but not many people know that. They just say quadriplegic. After my injury, the toughest adjustment was basically I was a hands-on type of guy. Everything I did was physical, so just not being able to do things like work out, play sports, definitely sucked.
It's a different change of pace for the whole family. Like, he doesn't have a lot that he can do, and like you want to get his mindset like to do something else.
Probably a couple years after my brother found the quad stick online.
I found it, linked it to him. He's like, it's $250. Like, I don't want to do it and not be good at it.
My fear with using the quad stick was that I wouldn't be good, and I'm not a type of person that likes to not win.
And I was like, well, you're not gonna know, just buy it. Just try it and let's see.
You gotta go left, right, right, right. That's good, perfect. Right, 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 straight, straight. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going, keep going, keep going. It's good. The quad stick is basically one joystick where you have 3 holes in it you can sip or puff on one of the holes, 2 of the holes, or all 3 of the holes at the same time. And you can also light sip or light blow. So you basically have like 32 some odd combinations you can use. Most people probably would be like, what the hell did you just do? I just did like 18 commands to do that though.
I noticed as I'm playing them, like, started getting harder and harder and harder. And that's when I was like, man, this is amazing. Amazing that the fact that he could go back to what we did when we were kids, you know? And it gave him something to wake up and do every day and to beat me again.
After you just practice, learn your limits on the thing and what you can and can't do, after a while I got good at it. Oh shit.
Oh, incoming.
Oh my god.
So if you haven't watched any Twitch streams before, he'll stream himself playing video games. Later on, he goes on to talk about the game he's streaming is a live action game. So he's playing real time with other people, and basically that quad stick lets him be legitimately competitive. Other players oftentimes don't know who they're playing against, and he goes on to say that he just loves, like after a game, showing people that he just beat them with his mouth, which is just like a hysterical like take on the situation. So yeah, we're gonna do just two more. I think the next two videos are a little shorter.
Hey guys, it's Sam with the Blind Spot. So in the past,
I'm gonna jump ahead. So Sam is partially blind. He has low vision. So he kind of uses a collection of assistive tech, which is not uncommon. And they kind of find the right balance for work that works for them, instead of relying on just one tool.
using my computer, it's very similar. I use the three-step process. I use just my normal vision. I can get close here and I can tell basically what these things are. These are all folders. I can't read them very well, but I can tell where they are. If there was a video I was looking for, I can see it well enough, just my naked eye, to click on it. If I needed to get closer,
three, editing one unselect, editing one.
I can do that, and I can zoom in and I can see what I need to. And you probably hear it talking because I'm using zoom text and I have it set to speak certain things. And that is totally customizable. You can have it speak as much or as little as you want. I even have it set to hover. So if I hover over something with my mouse, it will read what it is.
Item type MPEG-4 audio size 17.9 MB 800.
And a quick little tip, and this is for a lot of screen readers. If you just tap the control button, it will make it stop reading. So that I usually have.
So as you can see, Sam's got some vision, basically super zoomed in. He can kind of see what's going on, but he does also rely on good text so that it can read to him the smaller font sizes and stuff, which he can't see.
Hi, my name's Jason Holt.
I don't know if I can play this video full screen because the Google controls are in the way. I guess we're just going to watch this a little bit smaller. This video is not too long. There we go.
Universal Access Department. Today we will be demonstrating a screen reader. With the screen reader, I, as a blind person, can navigate to a web page, and I don't use a mouse because I can't see where the mouse is pointing, but I can use a keyboard, and JAWS, the screen reader, will tell me where I am on the page and allow me to read various parts of the page. Okay, let's take a few minutes to actually see how JAWS works. Here we are at my main screen on my computer, and I want to browse the internet, so I will open up a browser. I'll press the Windows key.
Menu, search box, edit, type text in this edit field or press up or down there.
And JAWS announced that I have a menu. Then I want to find my browser. My favorite browser is Firefox.
JAWS 17.0, one of Internet Explorer submenu, Word 2013 submenu, Firefox submenu 406.
Firefox, that's the one I want, so I'll press enter.
Enter, leaving menus, Firefox, Mozilla Firefox, start page dash Mozilla Firefox, search clear.
That opens the browser. Now I'll press Alt-D to put my cursor in the navigation bar.
Alt-D, navigation toolbar, search.
Now let's go to our homepage, the community college's homepage. So I'll type SLCC
period EDU.
You notice that JAWS repeats to me each character as I type it. That way if I make a mistake, I can hear it and I can backspace.
Slash U http://
And I can retype it again.
U search or enter address edit combo SLCC.
Now press enter.
SLCC-Mozilla Firefox. Page has 3 regions, 8 headings, and 68 links. SLCC.
Oh, it says SLCC. It sounds like I'm on the right page. Okay, here we are on our home page, and I want to go to the accessibility page, the college's accessibility page. I don't know where that is on this screen, so I'll do a search.
So that was a brief JAWS demo. If y'all are on Macs, the primary screen reader is called VoiceOver. On Windows, there are a lot of options. I think the kind of just interesting thing, if you noticed how quickly JAWS is reading to them, very often, even default settings for screen readers are really hard to pick up if you've been relying on sight for your whole life, just because they've practiced listening to things very quickly. Otherwise, it simply takes too long to get through a web page. So I think this is anecdotal, but I've heard that about 8x speech speed is average screen reader speed. So that's incredibly quick. Yeah, so if you kind of liked this look at how people actually use these tools, the W3C has put together a collection of stories from people that they go through basically different assistive tech, and they kind of show you, explain to you how they use those tools. So if we want to make something accessible, there are 4 principles that the W3C, I don't remember who made these principles. WCAG made these principles. We'll talk about who WCAG is later, but it is like an official standards body. So they made these 4 principles that we can follow. So the first principle is to make something perceivable. So what does perceivable mean if you're using a Braille reader, for example? So a Braille reader is similar to a screen reader, but instead of reading it out loud to you, it is it'll basically give you like a Braille strip to read. It refreshes, it does the whole thing. Cool little piece of tech. But what is a perceivable experience for someone using that? So obviously we want to be able to read all the content on the page, and we want to be able to navigate between blocks of content. So our UI needs to be able to adapt to, or it needs to be able to adapt what's on screen and that most people might consume visually, to other modes where someone might be consuming it by touch or by listening. And then we also have things of like, what does perceivable mean if maybe you're prone to migraines? So you have your screen brightness all the way down, you might be in a pretty dark room. So now things like color contrast and strong lines in our UI, those are kind of the main modes that we need to make sure that things are distinguishable so that someone can see what's going on. So I think in 2 words, perceivable can be adaptable and distinguishable. We want our UI to adapt to as many people as it can so that they can distinguish everything that's going on. Next, we have operable, which in some ways is the opposite of perceivable. If with perceivable, we want people to be able to consume our content, with operable, we want them to be able to do something with it. So basically, we need to be able to make sure that everyone can perform every action that our page provides. Mouse interactions are maybe the standard that a lot of developers develop to. And then maybe keyboard is probably the next most thought after. But as we saw with the quad stick, that basically the mouth control, there's a long tail of other devices that people use that is difficult to code for every situation. So we're really relying on standards here to provide those experiences, where if we code to a set of standards and those tools can consume that set of standards, we can all kind of meet in the middle and provide the best experience for the most number of people, instead of having to codify an individual experience for each mode of interacting. So I guess to sum up, with Operable, we want things to be keyboard accessible. We want things to be given enough time so that a user can complete it, no matter what else they might be doing. And we want it to be able to adapt to different modes of input. We want our content to be understandable. So I guess with understandable, kind of broke it down into three things. One, the readability and understandability of our content. We can be literally talking about the language that it's in, but also things like abbreviations and the reading level of our users also is important there. We have predictable, where consistent wording, consistent navigation, consistency throughout your UI is kind of the most important thing. So if you open up a modal and you've got a little X in the top right corner, probably most everyone is going to assume that closes the modal. That's probably not a good spot to experiment with different interactions. That's a spot where people assume that it's going to close it. So here, I couldn't really think of an icon that would show what is a predictable icon. So I fell back to text. It's understandable, it's perceivable. It maybe doesn't look the same, but it gives you the information that I'm trying to convey, which I think a lot of people will agree that conveying information is going to be our most important objective. And then we have avoiding or correcting mistakes. So undo is really powerful there, but also clear and direct error messaging and labeling. Those things can help people basically avoid frustration throughout our experiences. Lastly, we have robust. I think robust really comes into play for the support matrix that I think a lot of developers have in their mind of, okay, we've got all these operating systems, and those operating systems can run n browsers, and the browsers and operating systems here are at least Kibana's support matrix. But again, I think I used the term long tail before. There's a lot of assistive tech, and a lot of people use a mixture of multiple of these. So, where we might sometimes do something of like, if you're in one browser, do one thing, if you're in another browser, do another thing, that becomes completely unscalable when you're looking at the amount of assistive tech that's out there. And so, again, we're falling back to strong standard bodies and both developers and assistive tech hardware following those standards so that we can build one experience that's usable by many people. So that was a lot of things to keep in mind. Certainly, I think a bit of shift in thinking of when you're building things. So what do we do from here? So I think the first thing to do is to think about it. Even before you do anything, to think about how this component or this page or what have you that you're building, how that can be made accessibly. I think the earlier you start in the process, the easier it is. So the less time, the less effort you invest. Or sorry, that was a weird phrasing. The earlier you start, the less time and effort you have to invest into making something accessible. The later you start, everything is still possible, but it's going to take more time and more effort. And then out of things to do, literally, like to actually change, is keyboard testing. If your experience, like your site, your app, what have you, is entirely usable by a keyboard, that is a great minimum bar. It's also one of the easiest things to test. You don't have to learn any new software. You don't have to try to perceive a site through a different sense. just put your mouse away or your trackpad and try to tab through everything. If you can do every action on your site only using a keyboard, you're, I don't know, 90% of the way there to having a fully accessible experience. So this is definitely the #1 low bar that you can meet. Next is automated testing. I know I like to minimize the amount of work I have to do. I think many other people like minimizing the work that they have to do. So we rely on automated testing to handle as much as it can. Unfortunately, it can only handle about 30% of requirements, but fortunately, those are the most common issues. So though it's covering maybe a small set of requirements that are set, those are the requirements that you're going to run into most often. The other cases are maybe for more bespoke things so that you won't run into as much. So it does require a little bit of manual intervention. This is the point where you're going to have to maybe get a little primer on how to use a screen reader and to start running things through yourself. This is also where you're going to start maybe coming across the term ARIA a lot, which I want to take a moment to talk about. ARIA is a set of HTML attributes that were created to provide more meaning to assistive technology. You can have an ARIA attribute that tells a screen reader that something is a certain type of button and if that button is enabled or not, things like that. And it's super powerful. In fact, it is so powerful that you can really shoot yourself in the foot with it. So unfortunately, I think a kind of depressing statistic is there was a study done on literally 1 million homepages, and out of the million, if there was an ARIA attribute present, it on average had 11 more issues than any other page. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of things that you can't make accessible without ARIA, but it's not one of those things you throw in there and hope it works. It's definitely one of those things that you put in with care because it can take a otherwise decent experience and really ruin it instead of enhancing it. And then the last step, when you've kind of got a good bar, you think you're good to go, is start testing with real users. If you don't use assistive tech daily, you're not going to be very representative. And so you can reach out to external users, you can reach out to internal users. We're a big company. There are also services out there that will recruit users of different assistive tech, and they'll run through your software with you. I think over here, there's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem of you're not going to have a lot of users that use assistive tech if you didn't have an accessible experience to start with. So you do have to, there's a little bit of inertia that you have to overcome initially to be able to get to this stage. But if you're at this stage, you're already in a pretty good spot. So probably not worried about too much. So this talk has been pretty high level. I haven't detailed on how to fix any issue or anything. So I want to leave you with some paths on how to go forward. I guess real quick before actually jumping into that, just want to gloss over some terms that I think a lot of posts and books and whatnot will assume you might know. A11Y just stands for accessibility because people are lazy and don't want to type it. AT is assistive tech, so literally anything that someone might use to interact with a site that wasn't planned for. It can be assistive tech. SR is a screen reader. It's a type of assistive tech that is thought about pretty often. WCAG is the standards body I talked about before. And they really do set rules and requirements and expectations on how everything should work. So developers can build towards those standards and assistive tech can build against them. They set 3 levels. A is kind of you meet a minimum bar. AA is you're doing good. AAA is cherry on top, you're amazing. WAI, I've never heard anyone ever say it out loud, so who knows. But it's a segment of the W3C, which writes like the HTML spec and everything. They wrote the spec for ARIA. And ARIA is the actual attributes that you might use in HTML to make something more accessible. So to sum that up, we use ARIA to meet WCAG guidelines to help screen readers consume content. Nice. And then a couple legalese terms that you'll hear, at least within the US. Section 508, that's basically if you ever want to interact with the government, that's the law that restricts them to only procuring and using accessible software. So Kibana, for example, if it wants to have any government contracts, needs to be 508 compliant, and you might hear that thrown about. ADA is basically the private sector version of that law that limits discrimination against anyone that might have any sort of disability. DPAT is a checklist that the federal government put out to how to become 508 compliant. And earlier, when I was talking about the WCAG levels, that's important because basically most countries have their own version of Section 508 or ADA, and it can be hairy to actually figure out what your legal requirements are. But level AA is the kind of international standard. So if you meet AA, you're good to go. Okay, so now the sort of, but still not really technical things. The couple of things that I want you to walk away with, if you walk away with nothing else. Definitely work on keyboard accessibility. It's one of the lowest bars to reach, doesn't require any setup, just something you can go to town on. Low color contrast, I think it's one of those things that I tend to see come up and again, or again and again, because it's something that you might fix once and you think you're good, but then someone adds a third, fourth, fifth version of gray, and now you've got gray on gray text and no one can see that. Also similarly, using color to convey meaning. Not only do we have complete blindness and color blindness, like complete color blindness and red-green color blindness, and I think there's like a ton of different versions of colorblind, but also there are cultural differences for us to worry about. So using color alone, at least, to convey meaning is really fraught with a lot of missteps. Missing labels for inputs, pretty self-explanatory, but every input, if you want someone to put something in there, got to tell them what it is. A label is the best way to do that. Duplicating names for repeated elements. This one is kind of a weird one where you see on a list of blog posts, for example, you might see a read more link, 100 times with each blog element. And when we're consuming a page visually, we can see what that read more element is associated with. But if you're using a screen reader or a braille reader, for example, to consume content, everything is read out to you linearly. So when you hear just read more, and if you haven't been paying attention for a split second, you now don't know, is that read more for the previous thing, read more for the next thing, or you potentially have just forgotten your place completely, and you don't know what that read more is for at all. So this one, we don't always want to change what our site visually looks like, but there are some ARIA tricks on how we can provide better names for these types of links. And then last one is missing textual alternatives for non-text content. Biggest thing, obviously, alt text for images, but also things like charts and graphs that might be difficult to hear a description of, often might be easier to display as a data table or something. So yeah, these 6 things, it already maybe sounds like a lot, but I think once you start rolling with them, they're pretty easy to stay on top of. So I think these would be my big, the big ones to cover. And I think last slide to kind of let you go off and learn more. Semantics to screen readers, very long post. You'll probably come to it a couple different times because it's practically a book, but it will tell you everything you need to know. Getting to the heart of digital accessibility talks a little bit more about empathy and maybe how to think in a more accessibility mindset. The WCAG reference, for some reason I can never find it when I Google it, so I always just bookmark it. It is, instead of their very long-winded spec, it is a checklist on how to do things, so definitely an easier way to reference what you're doing. Does my site deserve recognition is kind of a tongue-in-cheek title for, I think, the most complete checklist I've ever seen. Who's who of web accessibility. If you want to follow people on Twitter, follow their blogs, this is a good place. And Inclusive Components is a blog run by a great accessibility specialist. He has components for you that are just ready to go. You can just copy and paste his code and you'll be great. He also runs through of like, if you're in this very specific situation, copy and paste this. If you're in this very specific situation, copy and paste this one. So you're in good hands where it's like, you don't have just one solution that kind of works for everyone, but he really has bespoke solutions for whatever your use case is. And that's it. Whew, that was a lot.